This is a Business's Mission podcast. Business's Mission. I'm Gaya Bort, your host.
The transition from living for God to living with Him. It's not complicated, but it's life-changing.
Well, audience, we are here today recording from Manila. We just had some exciting days at the BAM Global Leadership Forum. And here I met Jonathan, and Bill and Jonathan already knew each other for a while. And Jonathan, I was really touched by Jonathan's story, and he will share a vulnerable story of feeling called in business, walking with God, and then losing a business. It really impressed me. And thank you, Jonathan, that you are willing to share with us. So welcome, and welcome, Bill.
It's wonderful.
Hey, Jonathan and Gay. It's great to see both of you. I'm looking forward to our podcast together, this opportunity to hear your story.
Yeah, Jonathan, share a little bit more, with our audience. You were born in Australia. Who's Jonathan?
Yeah, as they say in Australia, I'm a dinky-die Aussie. And so, but I do live in Western North Carolina in the US now. But yeah, I grew up in a steel and coal city. My dad was a small business owner. My mum was an educator or looked after us. I went to school in Sydney and then ended up going to college in Canberra, which is our capital city. And that's where I had pretty powerful encounter with Jesus. At some stage of my journey, I'd made it answered the altar call kind of deal. But the big lacking piece, I think, in that journey from then until when I had a much bigger encounter was discipleship. And not really having discipleship. And so third year university, God just turned up in a really big way in the form of a young man who just felt a call of God to come and live in the dorm campus where I was living. It turns out I was what God had in mind, which was just amazing. That's a whole deeper story. And in that journey, very early in that journey, it was a very charismatic encounter. First time I'd ever been introduced to the power of the Holy Spirit and that daily working with that and having Him in my life, not just a head knowledge thing. So that whole journey, I was doing a Bachelor of Arts in political science and sociology at the time, mainly because I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do, and working in a 5-star hotel. So I loved the whole customer experience space. And then from there I did a master's in advertising and public relations at the University of Canberra. I flew through that, decided I loved marketing. I actually really liked the storytelling piece. So I loved copywriting and turning kind of the stuff into story.
I can identify.
I know you can. We talked about that. Yeah. And so I love that space. And so, always been a bit of a storyteller. And so, by this time, I'd already started doing mission trips, for example. I went on a university mission trip to Southern Africa and Zimbabwe, experienced God in ways that even today, it was 1994, 95, even today, still has profound impact. And I've been fortunate to be able to go back in and out of Africa a number of times since then. But, when you're doing traditional missions, you couldn't imagine taking businesses or helping people grow businesses for the glory of God in these places. And so that's been the cool twist of the journey over the last 5 or 10 years. And yep.
So talking about storytelling, do you happen to have any education, Bill, in storytelling? Were you in marketing? Because you're a great storyteller.
Bill's a gifted storyteller.
It must be a gift because I haven't learned how to do it from many words.
I picked up somewhere I think when you were at seminary that someone told you that you weren't a gifted speaker.
Yes, they have some evaluation with almost a speech therapist, I think it was. So all of the hopeful seminary graduates, they want to become a great speaker and have a great church. What they told me was, please do not go into any career that requires you to be a speaker, public speaker.
Oh my gosh.
There's a technical term for it. She said you have what's called a slow tongue. And so you will stumble over your words and you just don't want to be putting yourself in that position for yourself or for other people's sake.
I'm glad you didn't tell me that when we started this podcast.
Oh, this is fun. I mean, I'm a coach, so this is fun getting between you two and trying to pick some of this apart for you. You know, if there's any help you need.
Let's continue with your story, Jonathan.
Yeah,
I was
and
interrupting you.
I'm gonna jump forward a bit because obviously we're really trying to get to these crucial moments. I think as I grew more in the Lord, my journey with God was really trying to figure out how do I get God to like me more, right? And as I was trying to do that, what I was really just managing sin, managing life, living very insecurely, not changing and improving, not growing as much. I was growing, but obviously not as much as I could, and certainly not really transforming. And so I started working in a software company in the late 90s. This is for us, we're comfortable with this. There was a time where building a product online and selling it online was actually really cool. It was like, it was really unique and really scary. So I was working with a company that had developed internal software that would run across 56K modems. And so you were able to run your business remotely. And we all worked remotely in 1998, 1999. And we all worked from home. And so, but this guy, he was an interesting guy. Like, he was going through his own struggles, but he really called the whole marketplace journey out of me, right? He was quite prophetic in the way he looked at things. And so, there just came a time when I thought, okay, I'm going to step out on my own. So I was the head of marketing for this company. And so we were interviewing a lot of small business people. And what I saw was, how do you do your marketing? What does your strategy look like? How do you coordinate it? What are the cadences and the accountability rhythms? And
Jonathan,
most of them were met with blank stares. And so what I realized was I could provide I became a virtual marketing manager for small businesses. And so that journey then led me through where I was able to buy another marketing company that brought kind of graphic design and branding in-house. Then with a partner, I bought another business, and we kind of scaled that up rapidly. We had big business contracts, government contracts, and I basically was in charge of the marketing sort of strategy side, and she kind of ran the business. We both kind of coordinated the design and so forth. It was a good season.
Now, what I understood from you that it was really successful, and you felt
It
called.
was, yeah.
Maybe
It was quite profitable. Yeah.
And that also, we had a little intro talk that you were kicked out actually by your church pastor into.
Yeah, I did skip over. That was a little bit beforehand. So this is where I was so fortunate to have a church pastor. So there was a couple of things that happened in there. I had this strong sense of calling. The calling was to be there for people who run business, not just the business itself, to be a marketplace pastor and to build the Market Hope Church. Now, of course, I'm still going back to this very early conversation that I felt God had with me. He says, I'm calling you to build it. Like, this was within maybe months of having that big transformation. I'm calling you to build my church, but don't rush, because it doesn't look like the church does today. So that was in 1990. So this was kind of the next iteration of it, to be there for people who run business, not just the business itself, to be a marketplace pastor.
So this was your pastor who was encouraging you in this area.
Yeah, I mean, he's the only pastor I've ever been in a church with that's ever encouraged that. He was adamant and active about it. It was amazing. Yeah.
We are now in Manila and in the Philippines, and we just had a global BAM forum, leaders forum event.
Yeah.
And one of the things was that there is a new season for the BAM movement of bringing the church, connecting with the church and mobilizing the church in this whole area of business. And I see opening, actually recently built big church in Amsterdam. They connected with me. We had an online call with also my teammate. Soon when we get back, we have a talk with them, and they're like, we don't want only have you as a speaker. How can we do something together with the business people? Yeah. And we also sense that we should have an emphasis on this direction. I know from you, Bill, you didn't have a whole lot of encouragement during your time in China, did you?
No, it didn't seem to be anything that anybody understood. And I think at the time, we've been kind of trained to think in terms of particular goals and particular, vocabulary to go along with the goals. And the concept of kingdom in those years was really missing. We had no conversations about the kingdom in seminary that I know. And so you're left with church. And because I was a business person and the BAM concept hadn't really been verbalized yet, they just simply didn't know what to do with me. And so I'd come back and I would have lunch with a missions pastor and try to build a relationship and explain that, hey, we're really on the same journey here. We have the same goals, but it never seemed to connect at that time for over 30 years. And then I found a pastor who, within 15 minutes of meeting me, said, hey, would you spend time with our business guys? And I said, okay, yep, this is a very different
like
scenario.
a healthy space.
Yeah, I jumped ship in about 10 minutes.
Yeah. It's
So-
interesting. I mean, and to be fair, the last pastor so we didn't change church. We're not church hoppers, right? We changed churches because we changed cities. And so the
But
last pastor that
Jonathan, here you are building your company. You are
Mhm.
successful. You feel called. Then what happened? Tell us about.
Yeah, so I'll just go back to market hope, right? So
Yeah.
we have a funny kind of understanding of the word hope. We kind of more tend to think of hope in the context of wishful thinking, right? That I hope it's a nice day tomorrow, or I hope the market doesn't drop. I've just put a bunch of money in there. And at the end of the day, hope is a very powerful, very biblical, and a very God-ordained word, which is confident or joyful expectation that God is good. Right? It underpins everything. And so when I talk about market hope, in fact, the original tagline for my business, my marketing company, was confident expectation for you and your business. And that's where hope is for me, right? And I've had so many people say, hope, it's a bit wishy-washy. I said, well, if you only knew A, what it means, and B, where it comes from, comes directly from the heart of God. It's so powerful. And so I wanted to say that because that really creates the counterpoint to the journey we then went on next, because it turned out I wasn't very good at really knowing what that meant. So what happened was it was the financial crunch, 07, 08, 09. So understand, by this point in time, I was building networks in Australia. I was the CEO of an organization called the Council of Small Business of Australia. I lobbied 2 prime ministers as a federal government lobbyist. I was on all these different panels, like with the Australian Taxation Office and the Superannuation Guarantee Commission as a small business influencer. It was a wonderful season where God just gave me this little business guy all this opportunity to impact marketplace discussion, business discussion in Australia. And so all of this was going on, not realizing there was a big cleft coming. And that's where Bill would probably attest to this as a business guy, where when you learn the difference between profitability and cash flow, that's a hard lesson. Mm-hmm. So you were saying we were successful. So it's interesting because since then I've gone on this whole journey of redefining success, right? But that's for another story. But the idea of being successful, I looked successful. The business was profitable. We had some great clients. We were doing some good things. In fact, I had taken by about a year, I'd stepped away from the business as a day-to-day leader of the business, partly because we needed to move to a different environment. And so we just felt there was a chance to move, and there was an opportunity for my wife. She was a school teacher, to pick up a job. So anyway, I think everything's going well. I'm looking at the numbers in the business. I can see the bank accounts, all that sort of thing. And it's all looking pretty good. And then I get a letter from the Australian Taxation Office saying, you owe us $140,000. It's just I'm like, okay, this is exciting. And basically, I mean, just from a tactical point of view, once we started to unpick, it was the end number, just very quickly, the end number was around $500,000, probably actually $1 million more than I probably had it, so it was scary. And then, but it was really interesting through all these networks and connections. I think the most important thing was the redemption that came out of it. Because that's the most important story here, is there's always redemption at the other end of this story, and in a whole bunch of different fronts. So first of all, one of the things we were very big on, we had an organization called the Micro and Home Business Association that I set up. So these are companies under 2 million. There were probably about 1.5 million businesses in Australia alone. If you look at the US, you're probably talking about 10 to 15 million businesses. And our tagline, business is personal, right? It was always that pastor's heart coming out, like, business is personal. And people go, oh, don't take it personally, it's business. It's like, well, why do stockbrokers commit suicide when something goes wrong? I mean, don't tell me this stuff's not personal. So we were going through this challenge with our business. We had a lot of things going wrong. All the numbers fell apart. We started getting creditors knocking on the door. These are the scary moments when you don't know how deep and how far this thing could go. I engaged an attorney. His recommendation was pretty much just declare bankruptcy. So understanding the Australian system, a little different to the American system. Companies don't go bankrupt in Australia. directors do. And companies can be liquidated and sold off. So we went through that whole process, which was demoralizing.
How long did that?
Well, we paid the last dollar off. It took 7 years, but the intensity of it was probably the first 3 to 6 months. So there was a money and a tactical thing, which was massively outweighed by shame. There was a couple of levels of shame, and anyone who's run a business understands. We deeply care about our people, and the fact that we were unable to pay their salaries out.
How many
We
people
were
were
very
working with
fortunate.
you?
The Australian government had a system in place that if the company collapsed and there was nothing left, the Australian government stepped in and actually paid out salaries, which thank goodness for that. That's the only kind of social welfare I think is actually good. But it was so all our guys got paid out. I know this is going to be tough for a long time. My philosophy was within reason, we're going to pay everybody back. We're going to figure it out and we're going to pay it back. So I don't want to get to that because some of that's the redemptive piece, right? What God did in there was miraculous. But then there's this journey. So now we're trying to figure out all these different things. How do we pay stuff out? How do we close the business? Of course, then a liquidation company comes around and they make sure they get everything that you've got. They make sure they got everything that you got. I think we had like $16,000 cash left at the end. Funnily enough, that ended up being their fee.
But Jonathan, how did hope look like at those times?
This is the whole thing. I'm looking at this thing. We've got nothing. We don't know how to help people. We had some assets we sold, all that sort of thing. And I'm going, okay, God, I went back to you, called me to be here for people who run business, not just the business itself, to build the Market Hope Church. And here I was on the floor, like with no hope. I didn't want to talk to God for months. And it was shame. It was shame speaking, because it wasn't that I didn't believe that God didn't love me or anything like that, but I didn't know how to talk to him. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know where to start.
So, Bill, what would you ask Jonathan at this time? What would our listeners want to know from Jonathan?
Well, in our early years, there were difficulties, and I had this sense of entitlement from God that, hey, I'm a good guy. I'm trying to do a good
Come
thing.
on, God. You love me.
You actually called me into this ministry's form for the marketplace, and I'm disappointed in you. And so there's those struggles that we think we have the way God works figured out. We're doing our part, and he's not doing his. Did you have any of those senses of just disappointment
all along the way? And most of honestly, I'm not saying this to bash Christians at all, because there were really, really good people in this journey, but some of the people we were hanging out with at the time, like I was talking about where the business was at and trying to be really open and vulnerable. We had good men's group in our church, and these business guys are going, business is supposed to go in the other direction. I figured if I'd have lost my job, the church would quite happily have rallied around me and helped us out and all this sort of thing. But because I'd lost a business, it was kind of this, what have you done wrong? Like, what did you do? And so for a short season there, it was me and my wife. The first redemptive piece out of this was at all costs, I was going to protect my marriage. I didn't care. We actually ended up living in a very nice part of Australia in a beautiful seaside town. It was, if you're going to go broke somewhere, it was a pretty nice place to go broke, good coffee and everything. My wife was working full time basically to cover our expenses and costs. I was busy trying to rebuild a consulting company on my own.
So how do you basically focusing on it? Because, I've heard
it's the shame and the guilt that steps in.
Mm-hmm.
We're good at dealing with guilt as Christians. We're not great at dealing with shame. And Jesus died for our shame, not just our guilt. And so the shame was, here I've now destroyed my family, our wealth. I made all the wrong decisions. If I'd only not done this business and just stayed where I was and just kept growing that, if I just kept this person on board, it's all the ifs, woulds, shoulda, coulda, wouldas. And I kept processing it over and over. And part of this comes back to where I talked earlier about the kind of the fears and insecurities and that sense of I don't belong here in the marketplace at all. I kept processing it over and over. And finally, my wife.
What did she ask?
Well, very perceptive. And that's why we're supposed to be together, right? And so she just finally said, what I realized is just how beautiful it was right back before any of this happened when we were stepping in. Rebecca and I prayed about it and we talked about it and we processed it together. She didn't have to fully understand. She still today doesn't fully understand what business is. She's got a fair idea now looking after me, but she didn't have to fully understand. She said, I knew this was the right journey for us. Now, Are there things I did wrong in there? I can tell you now, I could make a list of things like not paying attention to the business, not walking through the process financially, not making decisions earlier on, all sorts of things. As a coach today, I won't let a leader talk through their problems unless they can tell me how they're at fault first, right? Because we've got to get to the root of their fear and shame before we do
So
start.
how did you get to your roots of fear and shame?
My wife just finally said, stop. We agreed to this. This is okay. We're fine. And look, as I started to stop and really look at things, we were fine. I mean, we weren't going without food. We had a roof over our heads. Our kids were in good schools. They were good kids. I mean, we had a great family life. We had good friends around us. We were in a great church. Like once you stop focusing on all the shame and all the rubbish, you realize that God is actually good, like he says he is.
But
And
when was the last time you felt shame, Bill?
Yesterday?
Okay, you're still human. Bill, when did
Yeah.
you feel shame? Can you remember a moment? Or when, because I think it's the enemy, with these lies. So
yeah.
when did you hear? Tell me.
It
Tell us.
actually it was trying to come on me recently for a business history that I was involved with. I was responsible for it. The ball was in my court. I was making all the decisions. I do think I was pretty accurate, but at this point he wasn't a good business guy because he was asking me to do things that financially were expensive and the business never really developed. And so I felt shame over continuing to invest in a company that didn't, quote, get successful. Now, that same entity is going through a transformation that will cause it to have global influence, and it may actually be redeemed in that process. But until that happens, it really felt an embarrassment to me. And I spoke to the Lord. I said, Lord, could we just shut this thing down and not tell anybody we got this far? Because this really is embarrassing. And he said, no, keep it going. And he gave me some parameters to stick to. And so I did that. But when you're dealing with a company that he owns and he has all the money in the world, he treats it differently than we do.
Oh, yeah.
My emergency isn't his emergency.
That's brilliant.
So what was redemptive?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. I mean, I wouldn't be
It
able
takes
to be
another
living.
half an hour?
Yeah. No, in a nutshell, I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing today. I wouldn't have been spending the time with you guys this week. I wouldn't be living in the US. And my
So
kids
you
wouldn't be.
mean you are much nicer now than at that time?
I don't know about nicer, but older.
No, but Jonathan, serious, I think,
No. I mean it. I
yeah.
said that's the end result. So in terms of the redemption, a couple of things that happened. As I told you, I was sitting on some panels with the Council of Small Business, and one of them was the tax office. And of course, we had this massive tax debt that started the whole thing. We did these panels 4 or 5 times a year. They'd fly us around the country and they'd say, these are the policies we're developing and we want your feedback, advice. How do we communicate? How do we connect with business leaders and so forth with this? And so we'd have a day where we talked. And so I turn up to one of these sessions and the lady running it, she goes, Jonathan, I've sat you next to this guy. He's the commissioner. So that's the head guy in Australian government. So he's the commissioner for debt and collection. And I'm just like, I remember looking at him going, what? I look shocked. She goes, don't worry. He knows your whole story. And he's a good guy. And so I sat down next to this guy, nervous as all heck, because this guy knew my story. Here I am representing small business, and now I'm exposed, right? Because all along I'm thinking, like, I don't even remember sitting in the Prime Minister's office going, I hope he doesn't know what's going on in my business right now. And so that's part of that shame stuff sitting in behind, right? Anyway, I sit down. This guy's a Queenslander. So if you know Australians at all, Queenslanders are our Texans, right? Everything's bigger, better, louder, faster. And he sits down in a very broad Queenslander. He goes, so mate, I hear you got some problems with the tax office. And I just deflated. He goes, let's talk about it. And so we had some breaks where we chatted through it. And he said, I just want you to write your story, the things you've done, where you've been, what happened, all that sort of thing. Well, that kind of evolved for a little while because up until then, the tax office was calling me probably once a week saying, what are you going to do about this debt, right? And so the upshot of that was I get a phone call about 3 or 4 months later, and it's very formal. Guy rings up. He goes, we're here calling from the tax office the matter of XYZ Proprietary Limited. And I remember that sinking feeling like, here we go. What are they going to take from me? What's going to happen? We'd already sold our house and started to pay out other debts. And he said, I just want to let you know that we have decided to no longer pursue the debt at all. We're gonna let you go on this one. He said part of it was, and so anyway, I was so stunned. He said, is there anything else you want from us right now? I said, yeah, can I have that in writing? That was all I could think of. And he said, you should have it in writing now. I've still got the letter today that about that matter. Now, we had 2 or 3 big debts. One was the rent on our property. It turned out that my business partner was not paying the rent at all, the landlord, because I had
But
assets.
Jonathan, what I hear now, God redeeming the situation financially, what did it do to your heart?
Well, this is all part of this journey,
What?
right? So this one in particular was we actually negotiated with the landlord. It was nowhere near what he wanted. But I then, and I even felt bad negotiating, but it was a finalization of the debt. And then I got a letter from him saying, I want to thank you for your diligence in this matter. Nobody bothers to ever come back and try and make things right. Like just little conversations like that. We did start another organization in there just because I wasn't busy enough with other organizations. And so I was at a Cosboa function, and a guy came up to me. He was a Christian fella, an accountant, and he came up and he's crying. It's like, this guy's a very astute, very aloof man. And it's like, this was way out of character. And I said, what's up, mate? And he goes, are you a Christian? I said, yeah. And he goes, yeah, I thought you were. He said, I just want to tell you a story. And he told me this story about a guy who got into some horrible debt with the tax office, $2 million, didn't know what to do, so he killed himself. And because he figured that then the money, he had insurance long enough that he would then get the insurance money that would help his family move forward. And he just looked at me. He said, Jono, he said, how do we stop this? How do we stop this shame? And he used the words shame and guilt. How do we help people wind up graciously? Right? There's a lot of people helping people grow businesses. No one was helping people end them. And so, well, no one that wasn't just trying to take their money anyway. And so we started an organization called Wind Up Well. And it was in the middle of this financial crisis. So there was a lot going on. Australia fared much better than the US financially. But if you're in the financial market or dealing with government, and that was our problem. Government stopped buying for 6 months because they were afraid. They didn't know what was going to happen. And we were overcapitalized and couldn't survive. So we then out of nowhere, we started having these people come to us. These were mostly believers. They didn't know what to do next. And I was able to, just using my connections at the tax office, we went to a liquidation company and said, is there a way you can help us if we bring the bookwork and bring it in like a concierge service? And we just
Jonathan, Bill, what would the listeners pick up and what would they want to ask Jonathan? I'm using you as my co-host.
I think that they would want to know if he was seeing the impact of what's being turned around here. One of the echoes I hear in the story is a trajectory toward the comfort one another with the comfort with which you've been comforted. So it feels a bit like a training program for counseling other business owners eventually for what they're likely to encounter. And when they do encounter, what do they do with that? So I'm wondering, were you aware that that's part of what God was doing at that time, or was that later on?
Bill, it's always been in my heart to help people. That's my pastor's heart, I guess, to equip people, help them continue to discover what Jesus lays out before them. So all the redemptive stuff in terms of the debts, we managed to get that coordinated, organized, and then we went through programs where 7 years later we paid it all off. My attorney said declare bankruptcy. I said I'm not gonna, because I'm gonna want to pay him back anyway. So what's the point? And if we had, I wouldn't have been able to move to America. I can tell you now.
Yeah. So because we haven't clearly communicated that with our audience, and we will speak again with you in 2 weeks' time about you becoming indeed marketplace pastor. Identify, I was many years on nursery ships in small cabins. My kids were small, and in another culture, I remember, James 1, count it all blessings.
Yeah.
When you go through.
Which is my wife's favorite scripture, but that's because she's married to me.
But, we do need to wrap it up because we are already over time. Is there we're talking here about Kingdom Keys. What I picked up from the Kingdom Keys here is it wasn't overnight. It was deeply going through the mud.
It still harasses me every now and then. setbacks. Like,
Yeah,
imagine if that
you.
hadn't happened, where I'd be now.
Yeah, I saw your emotions yesterday, even talking about it.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
It
So
wasn't.
the big things for me was my marriage. Like, marriage matters more than anything else. Keep
Yeah. So can you
communicating, keep
give
connecting, keep loving.
3 points? Keep it short.
Yep. Yep. So I'm going to give you two, like, from the side of going through it, but I want to share with people who are noticing other people going through this, right? Because that was the thing that was like, I had these good men and women of God. Like, one guy, he said, "How you going?" I said, "Good." Right? We always do that. He says, "Cut it and tell me how you're really doing." And I started talking and I broke down. So this is from the other side. Be genuine and don't be afraid of what's on the other side of that conversation. It's not going to infect you. It's not going to make you go broke. It's just, but you're going to be there for someone, and just listen. You don't have to give advice. Don't tell them God's got a great plan for you. That made me want to punch people in the face. I'm sorry, but the old right hand of fellowship. So that's that side. From my side, the marriage was number one. Marriage, and obviously family and all that sort of thing. And so always communicating, managing our finances carefully, not doing anything silly. I think the other side was just realizing that God didn't love me any less through this journey,
So
and just a deeper love and affection that I've been able to unpack now on the other side of it, and to see
and
just how faithful He still is and was then.
so, Bill, in finishing up, what do you hear? What are some of the keys?
Right. One of the keys I see is in the kingdom, you do need to have a commitment to your word, to honor agreements and relationships. And even though it made this journey more difficult for Jonathan, he never seemed to to consider not paying the debt back. So there's something in there that's a real treasure for people. And it really is a very significant element that he doesn't, I think he just passed over it in telling the story. But I'm picking up that really is a wonderful element that the Lord had given to him knowledge of, and just stay with what you said you would do and do it. Took 7 years to get everybody paid off, but there's a lot of honor of other people in that action, and that's a
Mhm.
kingdom key.
Well, thank you for picking that up. What I also picked up, and we didn't really talk a lot about that, but the whole pastor, he kicked you out of the church. You
We talked about it in both. Yeah.
stayed in the church as a member, but go out there in the marketplace. And I'm looking forward to our next talk and to hear your vision for the marketplace,
Wonderful.
what you are doing presently in the States. You were kicked out of Australia to the mission field
That
after
was
you
my
paid your
choice.
debt, and out there in the mission field of the United States.
Yeah.
And like you said, that's what we learned today, these last days at the BAM gathering. I learned, that we are wherever we are. We are never not kingdom representatives and sharing, and we are all called in a mission wherever we are.
Absolutely.
So
That's the kingdom piece for me, is that it's not an either or, it's an as well. There's just so many moving parts, and we're all called to do something.
yes. So thank you for with us, Jonathan.
It's been
And
wonderful
I
being
mean,
here.
I
Thank you.
can hear you are a storyteller. Thank you for being with us, and
Oh,
looking
wonderful.
forward to our next talk
Thank
in
you.
2 weeks' time.